You tell yourself you will stay calm this time. But the moment the argument heats up, something snaps. You swear you are done with a habit that hurts you, yet you reach for it again, like your hand is moving on its own. Or you keep choosing the same kind of person, and the ending feels familiar before it even arrives. Psychology has a blunt question for moments like these. Who is really steering? Sigmund Freud built his entire view of personality around the idea that much of our behavior is not authored by conscious intention, but pushed by forces outside awareness. In his world, the mind is never fully transparent to itself. Freud often gets pictured through a simple image: the mind as an iceberg. The small part above water is what you can name right now: your thoughts, your plans, the story you tell about why you did what you did. But the larger mass sits below the surface, made of memories you do not actively hold, wishes you would rather not admit, and conflicts you learned to bury because they felt unsafe or unacceptable. For Freud, that hidden layer is not quiet. It leaks into everyday life through habits, sudden emotional surges, dreams, slips of the tongue, and the defenses we use to protect our self-image. To explain that inner push and pull, he mapped personality into 3 interacting forces. In Freud's model, personality is less like a single voice and more like a tense conversation happening at once. The id is the oldest part, built from raw instinct and immediate appetite. It runs on the pleasure principle, chasing satisfaction and dodging discomfort with very little patience for consequences. When you impulse buy, overeat, lash out, or crave reassurance right now, that urgency has the flavor of the id. It is not evil or childish in a moral sense. It is simply unconcerned with long-term cost. The superego develops as you absorb rules, ideals, and the standards of family and society. It acts like an internal judge, pressuring you to be good, responsible, and acceptable. It restrains the id to prevent future trouble, but it can also generate guilt, shame, and harsh self-criticism when you fall short. If you feel you must always be correct, productive, or morally clean, you are hearing the superego at full volume. Between them sits the ego, the practical negotiator. The ego works by the reality principle, trying to satisfy desire in ways that will not destroy your relationships, your reputation, or your future. It does not silence instinct, and it does not worship the rule book. Instead, it bargains, delays, and redirects, turning "I want this now" into "what can I do that is workable?" When the ego is strong, you can tolerate tension without acting it out. When it is overwhelmed, you might swing between indulgence and rigid control. For Freud, that inner balance shapes how you decide, cope, and become yourself. Freud argued that this inner negotiation does not start in adulthood. It begins early, shaped through a series of psychosexual stages, each organized around a different zone of pleasure and a different kind of conflict. In the oral stage, the mouth is central. Feeding and soothing are tied to safety and connection. If that early need for comfort is repeatedly frustrated or overindulged, Freud thought a person might later seek relief through oral habits, like smoking or patterns of eating that feel less like hunger and more like emotional regulation. In the anal stage, the focus shifts toward control, order, and the tension between impulse and restraint. Conflicts here were linked to later extremes, either a loose, messy style or an anal retentive personality, marked by rigidity, perfectionism, and a need to manage everything. In the phallic stage, Freud introduced his most controversial ideas, including the Oedipus complex and the concept of penis envy, attempting to describe unconscious family dynamics and identity formation. Many readers challenge these claims, especially his assumptions about women and development, but within his framework, the point is that desire, rivalry, and morality collide at a formative age. The latency stage follows, when sexual energy is thought to quiet down and attention turns toward learning, friendships, and social skills. Finally, the genital stage represents maturity, where intimacy and attachment can become more balanced. Across all 5 stages, Freud emphasized that unresolved conflict leaves a lasting imprint on personality. This is where Freud's idea of fixation comes in, A fixation is not a label meant to trap someone. It is his way of explaining why the mind keeps returning to an old solution, even when it no longer fits the present. When a stage ends with conflict that feels unresolved, some part of the personality stays hooked to that earlier pattern of coping. Oral fixation, for instance, can show up as a persistent need to self-soothe through smoking or eating, especially under stress. Anal fixation can tilt in opposite directions, either toward carelessness and mess, or toward an anal retentive style that is overly controlled, perfectionistic, and tense. In Freud's lens, repetition is a clue. None of this comes without heavy criticism, and Freud has taken more than most. Critics argue that he made sexuality too central, treating it as the engine behind far more of human life than evidence can justify. Others point to his claims about women, especially ideas like penis envy, as reflecting cultural bias and framing female development as a kind of lack. And from a modern scientific standpoint, many of his conclusions are hard to test, since they were drawn largely from clinical casework rather than controlled experiments and measurement. Yet his influence is still undeniable. He popularized the idea that motives can be hidden even from the person acting on them, and he gave psychology a language for inner conflict, defense, and the long shadow of early experience. That legacy shows up most clearly in psychoanalytic therapy, a style of treatment built around the idea that insight can loosen what feels automatic. The work often turns backward, not out of nostalgia, but because early relationships and childhood rules are where many of our internal conflicts first took shape. A therapist listens for patterns that repeat, the same kind of partner, the same argument, the same shame response, the same urge to control. The goal is to trace those patterns to the hidden bargain between instinct and conscience, between what the id wants and what the superego forbids, and how the ego learned to manage the tension. When buried feelings and memories are brought into awareness, they stop needing to appear as symptoms. You may still feel desire, guilt, or fear, but you gain room to choose your response instead of being pushed by it. Stepping back, Freud's psychoanalytic view is only one lens in a larger map of personality theories. Trait approaches describe stable patterns like extroversion or conscientiousness. Behavioral theories focus on learning and reinforcement. Humanistic perspectives emphasize meaning, growth, and self-concept. Biological accounts look to temperament and brain-based factors. Psychoanalysis adds a darker, deeper claim that much of what shapes us happens outside awareness. And once there are multiple ways to explain personality, a practical question follows naturally. How do we measure it with any consistency? That question leads into psychometrics, the logic behind personality tests, what they really capture, and why certain quiz questions can reveal more than they seem.